Just a note that this podcast may touch on difficult themes and include some challenging conversations, so please take care when listening. This is The Widow Diaries, a podcast that holds space for the often unspoken stories of grief, love, and life after loss as a young widow. I'm Caroline Winter, and like so many, I've been on this journey. So come with me each episode and hear from others who've also walked the winding path of widowhood in their own way. The Widow Diaries, for First Light Widowed support, where no story is the same and every story matters. There's something about losing your person suddenly. No warning, no goodbye. Just an ordinary day that turns into the day everything changes. When Richard died, he was here one moment and gone the next. I replayed every small thing. Our last conversation, that last look, that last text. You look for meaning in moments that felt completely normal at the time. And then there's the language of it all. What you call them, how you explain them, how other people receive your grief. For Jonathan Teo, the love story for him began online, long distance between the US and Australia, before he moved here in 2009 to build a life with Julian. They complemented each other. Not two halves, but two whole people who fit. Then one day, Julian went to work and never came home. A catastrophic brain haemorrhage took him within days. So Jonathan's not only navigating life after sudden loss, he's also navigating it as a gay man and the complex layers that can come with being a rainbow widow. He's my guest today. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Can you take us back to how you and Julian first met and what made you feel so connected from the start?
Oh, that's a story. So we met through a website. Some of the listeners, depending on their age, may be familiar with it. It was called Flickr. It was a precursor to Instagram. It was before smartphones, or just the very beginning of smartphones. So there weren't a lot of apps or anything. Everything was online. I honestly, to this day, I don't remember how I got associated with it, other than the fact that my ex at the time had been on it. And I must have created my own account to share photos and stuff. I wasn't a photographer, amateur or otherwise. But anyway, somehow Julian and I got connected, just like you do on Instagram. You know, people follow you. And he posted a photo, and it was a photo of himself. It would have been what we now call a selfie, but at that time it would have been a DSLR camera on a tripod probably. And along with it was the caption, "What do you see?" And I responded that I saw a handsome man with beautiful eyes, etc. And from there, we just started chatting online. Now, he was here in Australia. I was in the US. We just started chatting. It wasn't anything particular. Like, there wasn't any purpose behind it other than just, you know, getting to know each other online. And over time, we started chatting more and more on Yahoo Messenger. Again, depending on your age, you may or may not be familiar with that. We also started doing some Skype. Again, I don't think people use Skype anymore. Showing my age. And, you know, just started chatting with each other. Now, at the time, he was dating someone, but then they broke up. So this would have been in probably about November or so of 2008, we first sort of connected, and then in about March of 2009, he ended up breaking up with his ex, and we started chatting about him coming to visit me in the U.S. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. He had never been to the U.S., and he made plans to come in July and August, and it was just going to be, you know, we'd started to sort of be more and more attracted to each other. It was just going to be a summer fling because, you know, he was in Australia, I was in the US. How was that going to work out? But when we spent our time together, he came and spent 3 weeks in the US. And other than the first few days where he spent in a hotel and then also went to Vancouver to visit another friend, he spent the entire time with me 24/7.
Wow.
And we just connected. And I don't know what it was specifically. He just made me feel comfortable, and I'm assuming I made him feel the same way. And that's the way it sort of was for our entire relationship. And, you know, he left, and neither of us wanted a long distance relationship. I found out later that he cried on the airplane, which is funny because I'm the more emotional one. So, but I was sad and everything, and we kept chatting and everything. And it was about 2 weeks later. It was the 15th of August. I said to him, "Do you want to be boyfriends?" And he said, "Well, neither of us wants a long distance relationship." And I said, "But aren't we already in a long distance relationship?" And he kind of agreed. And so we started something. And the idea was that we would be together for 1 year and one of us would try to get to the other country. And about a month later, I lost my job in the US. And I was planning on coming to Australia to see him over Christmas, experience my first warm Christmas. And I just decided to move here.
Wow.
And I had so many friends who said, "Oh, you shouldn't do it, you know, blah, blah, blah." But I said, "I'm going to regret it if I don't try." And we knew it might not work out. I applied to university he was living in Sydney at the time. I applied to university up there for a master's in human resource management, and got into one of them. And that way, if it didn't work out between us and I wanted to stay in Australia, I had a backup plan. But it worked. And 14 years later, on the day he died, we were still happy together.
Oh, wow. That is such a beautiful backstory between the two of you. You've said to me previously you're not sure that you believe in soulmates, but if they exist, he was yours. So what was it about your relationship that made it feel that deep and, as you say, last those 14 years?
Yeah, he just made me feel comfortable. He made me feel like I could be myself. My ex wasn't that way. I always felt like I had to sort of be different for him. And when I met Julian, I just felt like I could be myself. He didn't expect me to change who I was. I mean, one of the first examples of that, if you don't mind an example, is he really loved to do dance parties and stuff like that. He loved music. He loved to dance. I am not a dancer. You don't want to see me dance. Typical white guy dancing, I guess. But he would go out to these dance parties. And so, I moved here on the 20th of December, right before Christmas. And on New Year's Eve, he went out to a dance party and I went with him because, new boyfriends, we have to spend time together. And I was miserable because it was loud, it was crowded, it was noisy. He was miserable because he felt like he had to spend all his time with me and he wanted to be on the dance floor with his friends. And so midnight comes around and they do the countdown and we do the midnight kiss. And I looked at him and said, "Do you mind if I go home?" And he said, "No. Do you mind if I stay?" And I said, "No." And, I went home. And every New Year's Eve after that, except for, a few that we were other places, like back in the US or whatever, he went out for New Year's Eve and I stayed home. I had ice cream, I had gin and tonics, I watched some movies.
That sounds delightful.
And at midnight, after everybody stopped screaming, I went to bed. But everyone that night said to him, "Oh, it will never work out because he doesn't like the same things you do." But it did, because we allowed each other to have our own interests. And there were a lot of things that we liked that were the same. We had a same process when it came to things like traveling, etc. We liked we had similar tastes in decor and furniture and stuff like that. But there were things that we liked that were different, but we allowed each other that. And I always say that, the idea of you complete me, I never liked that either. Because I am complete of myself, but he complimented me, and I believe I complimented him.
It's a beautiful way to look at it. And my husband now it has that very same sentiment. So it's interesting to hear someone else with it as well. We're going to fast forward now to October 13, 2023, an ordinary Friday by any account that became the day, though, everything changed for you. What do you remember about those first hours and days?
I remember a lot. We both had the ability to work from home, but we sort of often switched off days so that we weren't bothering each other, making phone calls and stuff like that. And he was going to work that day, going to the office that day, and I was working from home. And, it was the morning itself, is there in my memory, but it's not very distinct because it was an average morning. He got ready for work. I was in the office already, the spare bedroom, which was the office. And basically, he said, oh, I'm getting ready to leave. And I came out and I gave him a kiss and a hug and I said, I love you. And he said, I love you. Have a good day, blah, blah, blah. And he walked out the door. And that was the last time I saw him alive. And, it was a couple of hours later, we had something wrong with our TV and they came to fix it. And I told him they had fixed it. And he thanked me for, being there to allow that to happen and all that kind of stuff. And that he went off to lunch with his colleagues apparently, and it was about 2:30 in the afternoon, and I got a phone call from him, and right around the same time I got another phone call, but of course, I had answered his, so I wasn't going to answer the other one. And he said he wasn't feeling well, and I said, well, come home. And he says, oh, I got a lot of work to do. I said, but if you're not feeling well, don't stay at work, come home. And his colleagues, his employer was very good at that kind of stuff anyway. And then I heard his colleague, who I had met. I had gone out to dinner with a bunch of them at various times, so I knew them all. He came on the phone and he said, hey, it's not good. He's slurring his words, he's having trouble with his balance, etc. And then I could hear the first aid people in the background doing that stroke test, lift your arm, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he said, we're going to call the paramedics. Is that okay? And I'm like, well, yeah, of course, call the paramedics. So Julian got back on and I said, look, I'm on my way. And if the paramedics come and they want to take you to the hospital, just go to the hospital. I'll meet you at the hospital. Like, don't wait for me. And he said, okay. And I said, I loved him. And he said he loved me back. And that was the last thing I said to him. And that was the last thing he said to me. We hung up the phone and I got an Uber because I didn't want to drive into the CBD. And I didn't think I could drive at that point. I got an Uber and I was most of the way there. And I got a call from his colleague again. And he said, how far are you? And I said, well, I'm not that far. And he said, hurry up, it's not good.
Jeez.
And I told the Uber driver to pull over, and it was, I don't know what the distance is, and I don't know if you know Brisbane, but and at this moment I can't even think of the name of the park that I had to cross. But I always joke, I don't run unless it's, towards food or away from zombies. But I booked it across that park and to his office, and his colleague met me downstairs and let me up, and they had moved him to the lift lobby of the floor. So they wanted to be easier access for the paramedics when they got there. And he had thrown up and gone unconscious, and he was on the floor and he was having trouble breathing. And they were doing their best to ease him, and the paramedics finally showed up. And they did all that they could to him, and I won't go into all the details, but they did all that they could, and they said they had to take him to the hospital. And I said, of course, fine, and they took me, and every step along the way I kept thinking, it will be okay. Of course, when I was first going there, it was, oh, he's, still conscious at that point. I didn't know he had gone unconscious, but he's still conscious. He'll go to the hospital, everything will be fine. Well, then he's unconscious, so he'll go to the hospital, they'll do stuff to him, he'll be fine. Even if there has to be physical therapy, even if it has to be this, that, and the next thing, he'll be fine. Get to the hospital, they're doing tests on him, etc. The doctor initially comes in and says, I've seen people, it's bad, but I've seen people recover from this. But then she comes in a little bit later, and I'm really angry at her for this because she shouldn't have said that first thing, because she comes in a little bit later and says, it's actually catastrophic, there's nothing we can do.
Oh, gosh.
So he had what's called an intracranial hemorrhage. So basically a blood vessel burst, and he had hypertension, which was undiagnosed. And the amount of blood pumping out of that blood vessel pushed his brain down into his brainstem, and that's why he was slurring his words, etc.
Oh my goodness.
Because the hypertension was so bad, even if they had gone in and tried to release some of the pressure, it wouldn't have done any good. The damage was already done.
Wow.
And he was in ICU for 2 days before he was declared brain dead. So officially his date of death is the 15th of October, but I think of it as the 13th because that's when I lost him.
Oh, Jonathan, that's, speechless. When something is so catastrophic and so sudden and you are in that moment just trying to come to terms with everything was fine and now it's not, how were you coping at that point? Do you remember any of that?
Oh, I remember it. I remember scaring. So, when the doctor came in, she brought a social worker in. And the social worker was the nicest woman, like the nicest woman. But I think I scared her because as soon as the doctor told me that it was catastrophic, there was nothing they could do, I stood up and I screamed. And, you see those movies or those news reports or whatever where people are screaming at the death of their loved one. Yeah. And I never thought I was that person, but I did. And, I'm a big guy. I'm 198 centimeters, 6'6". And so, she was a little woman. She was beautiful, but like beautiful soul, beautiful person, but she was a little woman. And I think I scared her because I stood up and I'm screaming. And, his best friend, who was also my friend, was there. I had called him and he showed up and he was there. And, it's not a blur, but it's something I try not to think about too often. There was all of the things of, well, we're going to take him up to ICU. We had to wait for that. Then I had to call his sister. He's originally from Singapore, and his sister lives in Singapore. And I didn't have her telephone number because he always called her. I never called her. And I couldn't get into his phone because I didn't know his code. And I always tell people, make sure that you have your partner's code someplace.
Yeah.
And we couldn't use Face ID because he had tubes in his mouth and stuff.
Oh, gosh.
So, finally we found it some other place. We even tried to contact her on Facebook, but she thought it was a scam. Hey, your brother's in the hospital. We need money, kind of thing. So we finally got a hold of her, but it was just all of that kind of stuff that I had to go through, and I remember from that day. And it was just horrendous.
Oh, 100%, 100%. Had Julian, had he been unwell, or was there any signs that this potentially could happen?
No. I don't know how this will hit with people, but I always referred to him as the straightest gay man when it came to his health. Because he hated going to the doctor. He didn't want to go and find out if something was wrong.
Yeah.
So I had encouraged him multiple times because I'm not that way. I don't like going to the doctor, but I would rather know if I've got something and it can fix it than make it worse, And I encouraged him multiple times, even begged him, I would say, to go to the doctor and get a checkup. And I will. And then he never would. And that's something I'm mad at him about, that he promised me all those times and he never did it. I love him to death. Well, that's a bad way of putting it, isn't it? I still love him completely and utterly, but I'm mad at him because he didn't get his health checked. And so we didn't know. And if we had known, if he had gotten his health checked, it might have not been that bad. Again, it might have been physical therapy or some other issues, but we would have gotten through that. But as it was, if he had survived, he would have had, severe brain damage, and that wouldn't have been a life for him.
There are so many emotions at play when you lose someone, but I wonder as well about the anger that's mixed with love there, that this could have been something preventable had you known more about it. How have you navigated that, that anger-love dynamic?
Well, as with my health, and this is how I've sort of navigated the whole grief process, is that I have tried my best not to avoid dealing with the grief or not to avoid experiencing the grief. So I have, I've various times in the last 2+ years, I've written in journals, but I also talk to him. And there are times, particularly when I'm feeling it really strongly, that I just tell him out loud, I'm mad at him for not doing it.
Yeah.
But I just, I've never been, again, Well, that's not true. I mean, I guess sometimes I probably do avoid things that I shouldn't avoid, but I generally stick to the philosophy that avoiding things and putting them off often makes them worse.
Yeah.
So in a sense, I guess it's preventative grief, doing it now, so it doesn't hit me harder later on. And so I just talk to him and I yell at him. I mean, one time I told him I hated him for not making that decision, but then I realized that wasn't true, that was just the emotion it wasn't hate, it was anger. But this was all after he died.
Yeah,
so
of course.
He wasn't around to hear it.
Of course. You learn so much about yourself when you go through this grief process, don't you?
Yep, unfortunately.
Yeah, some things you might not want to know, but yes, you do. You are, I guess, what is described as a rainbow widow or rainbow widower, which kind of makes the word widow just a little nicer, can I just say. Talk me through being gay and how that can add a layer, I guess, another layer to grief.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't know if anybody else has ever used the term rainbow widow. I just used it because, and I use it because, LGBTQIA+, while it is, official and it expresses all the different variations, it's a mouthful to say sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I just added rainbow to it. I never thought about making it sound nicer, but I just, I felt it was a little bit easier to say.
Yeah.
But, I think, I've never been in a straight relationship. I've never been straight, so I don't know how it is in that respect. But looking at some of the stories and some of the things that some of the other widows, the First Light group say, I think I get the feeling sometimes that my loss, not from the widows, but from other people who have never experienced it, that my loss is not often considered as serious or as heavy as it is for someone who is a woman who's lost her husband or a man who's lost his wife.
That's interesting.
Because, it's only been up till 2017 that same-sex couples could get married. To me, and again, it's not a deep feeling, but it is there underlying sometimes, that it seems like some people don't take it as seriously because, well, it was, same-sex relationships, and they're not as serious or not as important as heterosexual relationships. That's my feeling. I have no evidence to back that up, but I feel that way sometimes.
And so, well, what does that look like, I suppose, in real life? Having your loss devalued somewhat.
It's just a feeling I get from people, and look, I understand that somebody listening to this might say, well, I get this myself as well, but it's an additional sort of layer of that. Well, it's been so long, why don't you find someone else, kind of thing. And look, I get this feeling too, just from the idea that I feel like our society is more sympathetic or empathetic, I'm not sure which is the correct word, to someone who's lost a biological family member than to someone who's lost their partner, whether that's a husband, wife, whatever. But I think that's I think why we often get the comment, well, it's been a year, are you going to start dating again, et cetera, as opposed to, you wouldn't say that to a mother who's lost a child. It's been a year, you're going to have another child now. I mean, somebody might have said that sometime, some in the history of the world, but I doubt you're going to get that as often.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's then the added layer of, well, you weren't, I call him my husband. I do that because if I say my partner, someone says, oh, my partner died. Oh, I'm sorry, when did she die?
Yeah.
So I say my husband, even though we were never legally married. And I think that part is also another layer to it, is that we didn't have an official relationship. So therefore, why am I grieving as much as I'm grieving?
Gosh, it's so much to navigate aside from just the obvious and the tough stuff that you're working through. And I think language plays a really big role when you become widowed. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yes. I think it does. And, I feel in some respects that if I say husband, I get a little bit more sympathy. And not that I'm saying things to have sympathy, but again, because that adds that layer of society has deemed that if two people get married, that is a more important relationship than if two people are not married. And again, we weren't legally married, we were de facto spouses. But, when I say husband, one, I don't have to navigate the whole, tell me about her kind of thing. But I also feel like some people take it more seriously because it wasn't just my quote unquote boyfriend or partner.
Yeah. Jonathan, you've talked around this, so I know the answer, and I'm curious to know if you've had to think about any, I guess, solutions. But, in terms of how society understands same-sex grief, I don't think that that's the case. You may have a different opinion, but from what you've said, I'm assuming not. There's still assumptions, obviously, that need unpacking. What could people do to, I guess, be more understanding, more sympathetic or empathetic?
Well, I think, look, for me, it touches on the same thing when it comes to just in general interacting with people, is trying to be careful of your assumptions about an individual or who they are, what their relationships are, etc. I mean, one of the things that's often said about homosexual individuals or people within the rainbow community, whether that's gay, transgender, etc., is that sometimes we often have to come out multiple times because society does make an assumption that if you're a man, you're dating a woman, and if you're a woman, you're dating a man. And I think that carries over into the whole grief spectrum. So, I think it's making that, it's checking your assumptions and thinking through, I can't assume that just because this person is a certain way or looks a certain way, etc., that I understand who they are as an individual. And just thinking through that process and stopping yourself from making that assumption. And I mean, I do it too. Like I do it all the time as well, because that's just the way we are brought up. That we have to put things into categories, and we have to know what those categories are. But I also think it's also looking at straight relationships and saying there are straight relationships that can be very serious and very close and very intimate and very strong, that of two people that aren't married, whereas there can be people that are married that have a really sucky relationship, put it that way.
True.
So that marriage doesn't necessarily change that dynamic. The dynamic is between the two people, not a piece of paper.
Absolutely.
And with gay relationships or rainbow relationships, the dynamic is between the two people. It's not between their gender or their sexuality or anything like that. It's who they are as individuals and how they get along with each other. And I don't know if that answers your question, but that's...
Yeah. No, it does. It does. Do you know of other LGBTQIA plus people who've lost their partners, and have you had an opportunity to, I guess, talk to them?
I did meet one in person when I was living up back in Brisbane, where we were when Julian died. And then there's those that are in the First Light group. But I haven't necessarily met any of them in person. I'm doing my best to try to remedy that so that we can have a little bit more of a connection with each other. But it's interesting because I think there's as much diversity in our sort of sub-community of the widowed community as there is in any community. This individual that I had met, his husband was sick for a while, and went through that journey of knowing that there was going to be an end. Julian's death was a surprise, but this individual knew that it was going to end, and that put a different layer onto it. And we did have discussions about whether it was better or worse to know it was happening.
Yes.
And I don't think there is a better or worse in that situation.
No.
But it was interesting because, some of the similar types of things of an assumption because you are male of who you've lost, and the seriousness of it, etc. But yeah, I'm trying to find a way to connect more with the rainbow widows that I've met through, the interwebs, and find a way that we can support each other. And also, honestly, to find out if my assumptions about the way I've experienced the grief process are the way other people have.
And all of that is really important as you sort of rebuild, to understand that for sure. You mentioned that that difference between losing someone suddenly, as opposed to someone who's had an illness and time to say goodbye, time to wrap up affairs. I also lost my husband very suddenly, and I've had those discussions about better or worse. It's just all bad. But for you, that suddenness. How have you come to terms with that without being able to have wrapped things up in a neatish bow before losing Julian?
To be completely honest, I'm not sure I have. Certainly, again, I've written in journals over the course of the last 2+ years. I've put out my feelings in those respects. Often they were focused on sort of Dear Julian, blah, blah, blah. But I don't know that I have, because there are questions I want to ask him that I can't ask him. There are things I want to talk about with him that I can't talk about with him. I can say my side, but I can't get his response. And again, there's no good or bad in either situation. But I think, there's a part of me that wishes I had had that time, even if it was only a few hours.
Yeah.
That I had gotten to his office and he had been conscious and we could have talked, because there's things I want to know. There's things I want to say to him. I want to hold him again for one more time. I want to hold his hand. I want to kiss him again. I want to look into his eyes again. And I can't do any of that stuff. And I didn't know that morning that was going to be it.
Yeah. I feel you. You're a couple of years down the track. You're just over 2 years since you lost Julian. Who are you now without him physically beside you?
Again, I'm not sure I figured that out yet. For 14 years, we had this connection. He made me feel loved. He made me feel important. He made me feel like, might sound cliche, but he made me feel special. He made me feel worthy. Not sure that, it's probably not for this podcast, but my therapist knows more about it. With my background and stuff, I didn't always have the self-confidence that a lot of other people do. So finding someone like Julian, there were plenty of times I was like, why does he love me? Why does he love me? Mm-hmm. But he did. And, everyone says that, and it's obvious in photos of us together and stuff like that. But I was that person. I was my own person, but I was also Julian's partner. I was also, we refer to ourselves as J and J, because Julian and Jonathan. And I don't know, it's been a struggle figuring out who I am. I've had people say to me, oh, well, now you can make your own decisions. You can do what you want. You can buy the things that you want. But for 14 years, we did those things together. And all of a sudden, I'm thrown into this situation where I have to decide on my own life. And, a few months after, I had to buy a new lamp. And I literally stood in IKEA, spinning around, looking at all the lights, trying to decide which one to buy, and thinking, which would he like? And I still do stuff like that. I don't know sometimes what to pick, and then I just think about what he would like. Because, not that he made all the decisions, but we just had that connection where we talked it through and talked it out, and, sometimes he would pick something, and as long as I had veto power, that was fine. So I haven't quite figured that out yet. I don't know who I am or I mean, in a sense, I think I kind of know who I want to be. I mean, in the sense that I want to use this experience for good. I think that's why I'm trying to reach out to others with other Rainbow Widows, trying to reach out to other organizations. I don't, for Midsummer here, for the festival, I went out and I talked to different organizations about First Light and what they do. And just letting people know, because I think it's important for all widows, but Rainbow Widows especially, to know that there's a place out there that they can get support and help. And I don't think people know that. I mean, I found out about it by chance.
It's fortunate that there is a community that is there to support, because when you are young, this isn't meant to happen. So
Yes.
To know that there's others that might understand even just a tiny bit is everything, isn't it?
Yeah, though I probably would say that we are taught that it's not meant to happen, but the fact is it does happen. And that's one of my things as well, as far as who I want to be. Like, I rarely say I lost him or he passed. I don't like calling him my late husband, because he was late a lot of times, but anyway. But I don't like using those terms, because it softens the idea that he's dead.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us as a society to acknowledge the fact that there's two things in life that we all experience: birth and death. And that means that all of us will experience the death of someone we love at some point in time.
Yeah.
And that's not always when we think it's going to be. My mother died a year before Julian did, but she was in her 80s. It was expected, more so. Sure, it would have been great if she had lived longer than that, but she died, she was in her 80s. It was hard, I grieved, but not like I did when he died, because he was 49. And that was not when he was supposed to die.
No, definitely not. You summed that up really beautifully, and I know a lot of people feel very similar. And I appreciate the fact the journey has no final destination, but you've obviously started thinking about your sense of identity now and going forward, and how you can put something that has changed your life completely, but put it in a place that can help others, that can be useful, I guess, for want of a better word.
Something positive has to come out of this. It can't just be my grief's not positive. Well, I guess it could be considered positive in some respects if it leads to something like this. But grief itself is not positive. I mean, it's the consequence of us loving someone, as I've heard many people say. But it's I want something positive to come out of this. I mean, he donated organs after he died, and that was positive. But I want something long-term positive to come out of that. And if I can find a way to make it easier for people, I think that's what I want to do.
Jonathan, what helps you feel connected to Julian now?
So, I mean, I have photos of him up. Photos of him cycle on my phone as the desktop or whatever you call it, image in the background. Different photo every day. But I also, it's the things that he left behind. I did the Monday after I started going through his stuff, and I know there's a lot of people that might be 2 years in and have never even touched their partner's stuff. But I started going through it. I mean, one, because it was practical, because he was, I refer to him as my better third, because he was significantly shorter than me. But he, so it's not like I could wear his clothes in that respect. But I started going through the stuff. But I've kept things. I've had a shirt of his made into a pillow, those types of things that a lot of people do. But for me, it's also just using the things that he left behind. I mean, he loved to cook. And I have all of the cooking stuff. I haven't gotten rid of any of that. And I'm not a great cook, but I try to cook occasionally. And every once in a while, I get a burst of energy. And I make something, but I'm using his cooking, you know, his pots, his pans, his wok, all of those different things that he had. A lot of the furniture I have, you know, moved back to Melbourne from Brisbane, and a lot of the furniture that I have is furniture that we bought together, and that keeps me connected to him. And finally, he always wanted a hammock. Like, he always wanted a hammock, but was never practical in any of the places that we lived. And so he ended up getting a swing chair, sort of like an egg chair, but it doesn't have the top part, so I can actually sit into it. Because again, being tall, if I sit into an egg chair, I usually have to lean my head forward because I can't sit up straight. But he bought this thing. He loved it. He would go out and sit on the balcony. And in Brisbane, of course, the weather's often nicer, especially in winter, that you can sit out. And when I decided to move back, I knew that if I was going to buy a place, I had to buy a place that I could fit that swing chair. Mm-hmm. Because that's a connection to him I do not want to give up, and I will not give up. It's a memory of him that I can't let go of at this point. So I would literally walk into, you know, apartments to see, and one of the first things I'd do is check the balcony. And if the balcony wasn't big enough for the swing chair, I would turn around and walk right out. Wow. And I had an agent once say to me, "You don't like the place?" I said, "No, the place is beautiful." I said, "But the balcony's not big enough." He said, "What do you mean?" And I told him. And he looked at me like I was crazy. But, you know, it's the thing that you do, and it's the things that keep you connected.
Yeah, absolutely true. What is something that you say to someone else who's newly widowed when you've come across them?
I think the most important thing, and the thing that helped me the most, was this is your journey. There is no one way to do it. Do it what works best for you. But do your best to be good to yourself, even if that means that all you can do one day is get up and eat something, you know? Don't try to worry about if there's a specific way. I mean, I see people posting on Facebook group a lot about, you know, I don't know if this is wrong, or maybe I shouldn't do this, or something like that. And it's like, no, I mean, you always have people saying, no, there's no one way to do this. And I've done that myself, or whatever it happens to be. And I think, you know, the most important thing for people to realize is that even though all of our journeys are similar, they are not the same. Because, you know, you and your late husband had a relationship that you had. It was a dynamic that you had together. Julian and I had a relationship that we had. It was the dynamic that we had together. We're not the same as you know, you and your late husband were. We're not the same as any other couple. Even another, you know, same-sex couple, we're not the same as that couple. So the way I do things and the journey that I have is going to be different in a lot of ways than so many others, and not to expect there to be one way. And I think that's, you know, again, that's something that we're told with the 5 stages of grief, that there's one way to do it, and this is the way to do it. But all of us know that that's, you know, that's a bunch of bull. Mm-hmm. First of all, it wasn't designed, I don't know if you know this, but it wasn't designed for people who've lost a partner. It was designed for someone who just found out that they are dying.
I did not know that.
That they have a terminal illness, and it's the way that they grieve about their own death, and then finally come to acceptance. It was not made, but we have taken it and made it that if you're grieving the loss of somebody, this is what you have to go through. And once you hit that acceptance, then it's all done, and you're happy again. And it's not like that.
No, couldn't be further from it, as many of us do know. What quote resonates with you the most at this point in your journey?
Wow. One I've been thinking about a lot lately, and this is not specifically towards people who are grieving, so I don't know if that's acceptable or not.
Of course, it is.
But it is, and I won't get the quote exactly right. Well, actually, there's two, because the one, as I mentioned earlier, it's that idea that our grief is a result of our love for the individual. That if it wasn't for that love, we wouldn't be grieving them the way that we grieve. So, you know, we should accept the grief because we know it's a result of that love that we had for that person. But so that's more for the widows. But the other one is that I've been thinking about a lot, and I posted about this, was the idea when it comes to how you react to someone who is grieving. and that there's a difference between being nice and being kind. And nice is, oh, it will be okay. There was a reason for it. It's been a year. Why don't you get out there? Et cetera, et cetera. It's doing something or saying something, or even not doing something, to avoid discomfort or to avoid awkwardness. So the person who has something on their face and you don't say anything to them because you don't want to make them feel bad. But then they've now spent the entire day walking around with something on their face. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whereas the kind way of doing it, the kind thing to do is to do what might make you feel awkward, it might make the other person feel awkward, but actually assist them and help them. And for a lot of us, we know that feeling of people saying those trite things and those cliche expressions, but then what we want is for them to ask us about our person, to sit with us quietly as we cry, to do those things which are the kind things to do, but not always, might not always feel nice. And I don't know if that makes sense, but that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately.
I think it makes a lot of sense. If Julian could see you now navigating all of this, what do you think he'd say?
I've wondered about that because I wondered about the idea of, if I had one wish, would I want him to come back and be here? And, there's a big part of me that says yes, but there's another part of me that says, well, I'm not the person that I was when he left. So what would he think of the person I am now? I think he would be proud of me. I want to believe that he would be proud of the way I've handled it. And, not that I've been perfect in any way, but that I haven't let it destroy me, which I know can happen for people. And I don't say that as a judgment to anybody else who's gone through something. Because again, my experience is not their experience. If I had their experience, I might react that way. But I really think that I think he would be proud of me and happy the way I've dealt with it. And then I'm moving forward with my life, even if it's difficult, even if I stumble, even if I don't always know which direction I'm going or what path I'm taking, that I am doing my best to move forward. I think he'd be happy with that and be proud of me for it.
That was beautiful. Jonathan, thank you so, so much for your honesty, for your strength, and importantly for letting us into your life and the life of your husband, Julian. It's been an honour.
Thank you. I'm always happy to talk about Julian. More so than myself, but I'm always happy to talk about Julian.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to all my guests for sharing their stories so generously. The Widow Diaries is hosted and produced by me, Caroline Winter from Pod Talk for First Light Widowed Support, which provides information, resources and connection for young widowed people throughout Australia. Follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode, and you can also find out more information at firstlight.org.au. This podcast acknowledges and celebrates the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which stories have been told for thousands of years and on which this podcast is recorded.